Architectural Outcast.
There's a common perception that art is something that goes on way over there, that only the hoity-toity are involved. And the hoity-toity themselves like to promote the idea that only those with the right education, the right background, the right credentials can truly understand and appreciate art. That's complete bullshit. 100% unadulterated, grade A, prime bullshit. Art comes out of lived experience. Here in the West, it's driven by the middle class lived experience. I would argue the hoity-toity are only capable of producing derivative art. But that's a debate for another day. Art surrounds us. We interact with it on a daily basis. And for many, it becomes the connective tissue that runs throughout our lives, helping us make sense of our experiences. I want to talk to y'all today about one of the most readily accessible forms of art, and arguably one of the most powerful, music. With just a couple notes, you can be instantly transported to a different time and place. It can evoke all of your senses, remembering experiences you had years before. I would like to tell you all a story about my experience with a classic rock and roll song, Bob Seger's Turn the Page. Growing up in southern Missouri, I went to a very small rural school. For years, I was the only kid in the entire school district who had a major disability. Most of my experiences with the teachers and students, probably 95% or better, were positive. But there were incidents. There are always people willing to stir the pot. And as a kid, you have a tendency to overemphasize the negative. I always had a feeling of being a little different, not quite fitting in. Of course, when you hit the teenage years, all those feelings are going to be exaggerated. My dad, one day, just handed me a song. Said, "Here, listen to this. I think you might like it." It was Bob Seger's Turn the Page. I could relate to the themes of loneliness, isolation, and alienation. But what I really responded to was the idea that how you feel doesn't matter. You persevere. You turn the page. Keep moving forward. So every time I started to feel a little down, I'd crank me up some Seger. It's almost like my father knew what he was doing. Fast forward. It's a few years out of high school and I'm working construction. I'd become friends with a couple of guys who guarded the site at night. Make sure people didn't run off with our supplies and stuff. At one point, I learned they were making more money guarding the site than I was building it. I made a career change. And for the next little while, I guarded construction sites at night. At one point, my boss came up to me and asked me, "Do you know we also provide security for biker events? Are you interested? It pays more." So I made another career change. I was working weekends providing security for rallies and poker runs and the like. I hadn't been on the job but a few hours when I first met an interesting pair of young ladies. They had a horrible reputation with the security team. They were constantly getting into fights, but they were also back porch lawyers, always claiming to be innocent. They argued so much and were such a pain in the rear end that the security team hated dealing with them. My boss called them the terrible twosome. After I met them, I started calling them the Valkyrie and the Redhead. My nickname is the one that ended up sticking. Over time, it got shortened to eventually it was just Valkyrie and Red. Both women were very attractive. Valkyrie was not classically pretty. She was what my grandmother would have called a handsome woman. She looked very Nordic, pale blonde hair that she wore in 2 braids down to her waist. Strong bone structure. She had cheekbones most women would kill for. Valkyrie was a giantess. I'm 6 foot in my cowboy boots. I had to look up to make eye contact, something I worked very hard at maintaining, seeing how what was at eye level. Valkyrie looked like somebody took a perfectly proportioned woman and scaled her up. She had an amazing figure, one that was on prominent display because their preferred outfit? Knee-high motorcycle boots and bikini bottoms. Oh yeah, and we can't forget the switchblade stuck in the top outside of her right boot. Red was a true Irish redhead. Flaming hair that she wore in a braid down to her ankles. Creamy pale skin with just a touch of freckles across her nose. She was lucky to reach 5 foot on a good day. She was lean and svelte. She moved like a cat, smooth and graceful, like velvet. Her preferred outfit? Thong bikini bottoms. These two had a major chip on their shoulders. They'd fight at the drop of a hat. When it came to Valkyrie, numbers didn't matter. She'd take them all on. She could fight, because more often than not, she was the one left standing. But the dangerous one, the real scary one, that was Red. The switchblade in the top of Valkyrie's boot, that was Red's knife. You pissed her off, she'd go for that knife, and she'd cut you from appetite to asshole in a heartbeat. She was a mean little thing. Everybody assumed that they were a couple, but if you got past the salacious rumors, their personal lives were a blank slate. I've seen best friends show more physical affection towards each other than these two ever did. As volatile as their tempers were, I never saw them fight. In fact, I never even saw them argue with each other. And security was never once called to break up some domestic disturbance between them and some ex-boyfriend or whatever. As I said earlier, their personal lives were a complete mystery. I never did completely figure these two out. I had just come on duty one morning when my boss came up to me and said, "Valkyrie and Red had a fight last night. I need you to go talk to them, find out what happened." My reaction was, "Me?" It's like, "Yeah, you. Go deal with it." I looked over at my partner. He was like, "Good luck." Like, "Thanks, buddy." So as I'm heading over there, I'm starting to freak out a little bit. How am I going to deal with these two? In the short time that I had to walk, the only thing I could come up with was just treat them like everybody else. Their campsite was up on a hill off to one side. As I came walking up, it was pretty clear they were waiting for me. I said, "I wish I had a camera." Valkyrie spun around and snarled, "Why? What do you mean by that?" And I said, "Coming up here, your camp and your bikes were all silhouetted against the morning sun. The scene was really beautiful. I wish I'd been able to record it." I then established eye contact and tried to maintain as innocent looking a face as possible. After a little bit, it was Valkyrie who looked away, and she muttered, "Okay, thanks, I guess." Red started giggling. Valkyrie asked me, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I need to ask you all about last night." After running around talking to as many people as possible, I ended up back at my boss. He was like, "What did you find out?" I said, "Looks like this time it wasn't Valkyrie and Red's fault. Those other guys were having problems with everybody all night long." He said, "What do you think we should do about it?" I said, "Get rid of them." He was like, "Okay, your decision, you handle it." My partner was more than happy to help me escort them off the property. After that incident, relationship between them and security seemed to improve. But things really changed when somehow or another, they became good friends with my boss's wife. And then they started hanging out with her and all the other wives and girlfriends. We really liked that. It meant that they weren't out getting into fights and causing trouble. Less problems for us. I got to know them a little bit. If you could get past their cynical, jaded, and very prickly shell, on the inside, there were a couple of big old softies. If they liked you, they would do anything in the world for you. The Japanese word tsundere comes to mind. In the spring of '98, my life got turned upside down. I lost my longtime girlfriend. No drama or anything, just she had some family obligations that meant she had to leave the state. So when I had the opportunity to go to school to study architecture, I jumped. But I continued to work all the way up to the weekend before I left town. Friday morning, I noticed that Valkyrie was sitting on her motorcycle across the road from the security shack. I waved at her as I went by. She just turned her head like she was ignoring me. That's a little weird, but Valkyrie's weird, so no big deal. Later, when I came back from doing my rounds, I saw she was still sitting there. I went up to her to try to say good morning. She fired up her bike and rode off. Now that was really weird. Went around the side of the shack to where everybody was hanging out, and I asked, anybody know what's going on with Valkyrie? She's acting strange today. My boss's wife said, oh, that. She just has a crush on you. Oh, Lord. The rest of the weekend, I had a stalker. A giantess with a volatile personality was following me everywhere I went like a love-struck schoolgirl. Every time I tried to approach her, to talk to her, to explain my situation and why I couldn't get involved with her, she'd run off. At one point, I turned to my partner and said, this is just silly. He was like, sucks to be you. I'm like, you're no help. It was around 2:00 that Sunday morning when my boss came up to me and my partner. We were watching the front gate. And he told us a bunch of women had built a bonfire over by the stage. They'd taken over the sound system and were listening to music and dancing around the fire. They claimed that there was some guy coming up out of the woods staring at them. They were getting creeped out. So he said, Randy, you're up. Go keep an eye on them. There was a little shed about 20-25 yards back of the bonfire. Somebody put a couple bales of hay next to it. That's where I sat, with my back to the shed and a clear field of view of the bonfire and the forest beyond. I'd been there about 20-30 minutes when I realized one of the girls dancing was Red. More importantly, she had spotted me. She waved and started to walk towards me. I hadn't seen Red all day, but I figured where there's Red, there's Valkyrie. I put my hands palm down on the hay bales, ready to stand up, because I was going to tell Red, I'm on duty. I can't chat. I need to go make my rounds. But she hadn't made it halfway to me when over the loudspeakers we heard those first plaintive, smoky notes of Seger's Turn the Page. And in an instant, she went from smiling and walking to dancing. And I saw one of the most amazing examples of dance as self-expression as I've ever seen. She had brushed out her flaming red hair. It was hanging loose all the way to her ankles, and she knew how to use it. Twisting, turning to the music, movements like velvet, hiding, revealing, just to hide again, all backlit by the bonfire. Flames, smoke, her hair, her shiny skin. It was getting hard to tell the difference where one began and the other ended. She looked like a fire nymph crawling out of the coals. I was transfixed, and I didn't move until the end of the song. When I realized I had become so focused on Red's dancing, I had lost all situational awareness. I then realized somebody was sitting next to me, and they'd put something right by my hand. I looked over, and it was Valkyrie. She had her head down, but she was looking at me out of the corner of her eye, and she put her hand right next to mine, palm up. I looked over at Red, who was now openly giggling. I stood up and looked back at Valkyrie. She was looking up at me with those big doe eyes. I said, "You changed tactics. That's cheating." And I turned and ran as fast as I could get my little rabbit ass to move. Next morning, I was getting coffee when my boss's wife comes up. She says, "Why did you run from Valkyrie last night?" Trying to be smart and funny, I said, "Good book says, run from temptation. Last night, I took that literal." My boss's wife says, "Well, congratulations. Valkyrie's pissed." Oh, Lord. It wasn't 30 seconds later, and two bikes pulled up. Sure enough, it's Valkyrie in red. Valkyrie rips off her helmet and slams it down on the tank of her bike. She unzips her jacket, slides off the bike, and starts power walking towards me. I threw my coffee on the ground, started backing up, trying to keep distance. But I realized my back was already up against the security shed. So I went up on the balls on my feet, and I had my hands up, ready to protect myself. I was going to go turtle, cover my head and vitals as best I could, and hope somebody liked me well enough to pull her off. And I remember distinctly thinking, man, I'm about to get my ass handed to me, all because I told a girl no. Anybody want to guess what song was playing as she power walked towards me? You guessed it. Turn the Page. She came to a stop just outside of arm's reach. She put out her arms and snapped, "Give me a hug." My brain short-circuited. When it was clear I wasn't going to move, she said, "Fine, I'll do it." And she grabbed me in the fiercest bear hug I have ever experienced. I could feel her heartbeat. When she finally loosened her grip and I was able to look up, I saw the softest, most gentle eyes. She leaned down and gave me a little kiss on the forehead. It's like a butterfly had landed. She did a 180 and power walked back to her bike, where she slammed on her helmet and fired it up. My brain was still short-circuiting, so all I could do was stare blankly as I watched her ride out of sight. I realized Red was still standing there. My self-preservation instinct was still working because the first thing I did was check her hands to make sure she wasn't holding a knife. I must have been pretty obvious about it because she giggled. She stepped up and she put her arms out. She wanted a hug. My brain was working well enough that I could lean down and give her a hug. I got another butterfly land on my cheek. She turned, casually strode back to her bike, got on. She gave me a big wave as she rolled around the corner. I turned to my boss's wife, who, mind you, was laughing hysterically, and I asked, "What just happened?" In between cackles, she said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. I talked to Valkyrie this morning. I told her why you had run away. She cried. I think she likes you more." Fast forward a couple years. I'm in college, and it's a Friday afternoon. That evening, my girlfriend and I are supposed to cook dinner together and then go out with friends. She showed up a little early, and I told her I still had work to do. She asked, "Can I listen to music?" Like, knock yourself out. When I finished up, came out, my girlfriend was dancing by herself in the living room. My girlfriend was completely lost in the music. I was reminded of Red. When she saw me, she got a really happy smile. She put her arms out, indicating she wanted me to dance with her. By the time I got over to her, the song had ended. She put her arms around my neck and laid her head on my shoulder, and we waited for the next song to start. With those first couple notes of Turn the Page, I got goosebumps. Suddenly, I was smelling wood smoke. I saw soft, gentle eyes, and I felt arms around my neck and a heartbeat. And then I looked down. My girlfriend was looking up at me with the same soft, gentle eyes. I felt her arms around my neck, and I felt her heartbeat. One last quick story. A little while back, my wife and 4-year-old daughter made a trip to Korea to visit Grandma. I wasn't able to go, and this was the first time my daughter and I had been separated that long. When the taxi brought them back to the house, my wife told me I needed to wake up our daughter. She had done really good on the plane ride home, but she was under the impression that I would be waiting for her at the airport. When I wasn't there, she lost it, and she cried herself to sleep in the taxi on the way home. I reached in and shook her little foot. When her eyes opened and she realized that I was standing there, I saw soft, gentle eyes. And then she launched herself at me, wrapped her arms around my neck, buried her face in my shoulder, and started sobbing, "Daddy, Daddy." As I did my best to console her, and she did her best to strangle me, I could feel her heartbeat. That little heart was racing like mad. And then, out of the taxi came the sounds of Turn the Page. Suddenly, I could smell wood smoke. I saw 3 sets of soft, gentle eyes. I felt 3 sets of arms around my neck, and I felt 3 heartbeats, all representing 3 very different relationships, all connected by one song. My understanding of Turn the Page has changed over the years. As a teenager, it was all about enduring isolation and loneliness because there was hope. As an adult, it has become about why we are willing to put ourselves into situations where we know we're going to face loneliness and isolation. It is because of those moments when somebody tells you, in my case, non-verbally, how much you mean to them. When they look at you like you're something precious with soft and gentle eyes, you realize it's all worth it. They say every joke is a revolution, and that is true, but it doesn't go far enough. Every act of creativity is a revolution. Art is power. In this case, music is power. It has the ability to communicate and potentially touch somebody's soul. In this day and age, with all our modern technology, more people than ever before have access to this power. How do you know that you don't have the creativity to touch somebody's soul if you don't even try? At any rate, I hope I've given you all something to think about, and until next time, you all be safe. If you're still here, thank you. And if you don't mind, you're more than welcome to like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment.